So we have a lot of fairy and lore about all of that today, and my story is no exception. Lady Isobel was a laird's daughter, and not just a laird's daughter, but the laird's daughter. He was laird of all the lairds. He was a man nearly 7 feet tall and so powerfully built he could toss a caber with one hand. He had dark, curly hair that came down and melded with his dark, curly beard, and he had a fierce expression to match. But the light of his life, the apple of his eye, was his daughter, the little lady Isobel. When the laird would go out and hunt and ride and shoot his bow and arrow, little Lady Isobel was right beside him, her ringlets bouncing as she rode, and she could ride better than half of the boys her age and nearly half of the boys older than she was. She could ride, she could shoot, she could fish and hunt, and she loved being with her father. And because he was so fierce, and because his wife had died when Isobel was young, he was very protective, and people were very intimidated. And Lady Isobel, she didn't have many friends. She didn't have any friends, really, but she didn't care because she had her gran. And her gran would tell her stories and teach her how to cook and clean, how to take care of the horses, how to run a farm. She would tell her stories about the Fae. Some of them were sweet and some of them were funny, some of them like the ones we've heard tonight, and some were about the elf night. "Oh, Isobel," she'd say, "it's very important that you stay away from the elf knight. Remember, only cold iron can harm him, and I wouldn't want even you to have to test your reflexes against the elf knight. He can only be bound by an article of his own clothing. Don't forget, and never, never wish him near you. For one moment to the next, he would be there with his bewitching eyes, and he might take you away. He has taken so many girls and women away from our little area. My own auntie was taken away by the elf knight. Sometimes the girls come back, but their minds are not the same. They can't speak, and sometimes they can't even see. But the ones who never came back, like my auntie, we don't know what happened to them. Hey, my girl, pay attention to what you're sewing. No one wants to wear a blouse where the shoulder comes down to your elbow." Isobel loved her life. She loved her gran. She loved riding with her father, and she loved music. She would sneak down into the village and hide in a corner of a croft or a tent and listen to the fiddlers and the horn players and the singers and join sometimes in the dancing. And as she got a little bit older, people whispered to each other that it was a good thing the laird was so fierce, or there would have been trouble with a girl hanging around with those musicians. And all was well until the day that her gran died. It was a dumb thing, really. She'd been stepped on by one of the horses and not had it looked at, and her jaw had tightened up, and then she passed. And Isobel, just turning 15, went wild with grief. She ran out to the barn. She took one of the horses and she began to ride up and down, north and south, east and west, all over her father's territory, looking for an herb or a physic, something that could have saved her gran. Some say she even went to sorcerers and studied magic, white and dark. When at last she came home again, she was a different young woman. She didn't ride with her father. She stayed home and lived a quiet life until one fine summer evening, about a year after her gran had died. She stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes, and she heard from a distant hillside the sound of a horn. He blows it east, he blows it west, fine flowers in the valley. He blows it where he like it best, as the roses blow. Oh, Isobel sighed. I wish that that horn player were here by my side. And before even another thought had come into her head, from when those words had passed her lips, she saw a face in the window ahead of her. A man nearly as tall as her father, but so slender and beautiful. A smile that was wondrous, and oh, those eyes, green with a hint of silver. Isobel looked into those eyes, and she was gone. My lady, he said with a wondrous smile, how is it that I no sooner blow on my horn than you wish me here to your side? Perhaps you would join me in the green wood. Now, with the mention of the green wood, Isobel recalled her grand's stories. She touched her boot where her grand's iron knife had been. But the elf knight, for that's who he was, noticed. If you do not willingly come with me, I can compel you to ride. Oh no, said Isobel, I will go and get my horse. And she did. Though when she looked at the elf knight again, his eyes seemed to be more silver than green, and his sharp-toothed smile seemed less than wondrous. The two of them rode and rode and rode, and Isobel's black curls flew out behind her like a cape made of crow's feathers. And though she knew every inch of her father's land, after a while she did not recognize where they were riding. And just when she thought that horse would founder under her, they rode into a glen where the mist was rising off the grass, and there were 7 mounds, all in a circle. The elf knight stopped his horse, dismounted, and held out a hand. Light down, Lady Isobel, light down, for here have I brought and married 7 kings' daughters, and I want you to be the 8th before I slay you. Isobel's heart ran cold, but she thought quickly. She dismounted and sat down in the grass, spread her skirts out, and said, "Oh, my lord, surely you will come and lay in my lap that we might enjoy some time together before I must die." And the elf knight smiled and lay down in Lady Isobel's lap, and she began to sing a charm she'd learned from one of those dark sorcerers. And soon he was asleep. She took his knife belt from around his waist and bound him tightly, and he awoke. The sound of 7 women's voices were eerily rising around Isobel. Beware, beware, remember, remember, only cold steel can harm the elf knight, they cried. And Isobel reached down. If 7 kings' daughters here have you slain, fine flowers in the valley, then lie you here, a husband to them all, as the roses blow. when Lady Isobel rode back into the village that night, they say she was never the same. And it wasn't because the laird intimidated people that they stayed away, but because Lady Isobel herself was intimidating. But the woman did love to listen to music, and she could be seen with a fiddler or a drum player or a singer. But after that night, she left the horn players alone. Thank you all very much.